Hi, everybody. We're now going to have, because Greg got the talk started and he was talking about all the threats, Mark Jackson came highly recommended from people here in LA, several people in the urban forest world. So we're going to bring Mark Jackson up to talk about the climate aspect of what's happening and impacting the trees. Mark is, as you can see in the bios, Mark is a meteorologist and with NOAA, and we're looking forward to his presentation. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Cindy, and thanks to this group. This is now my third talk to this group. My first talk was back in September of last fall to talk about El Nino and what it should have brought. I must not have hit a wrong chord with that talk because they invited me back in March to help explain what happened. And even after that talk, they've asked me to come back for this one. So it's a pleasure to be here. I honestly have learned a lot about tree people in the last 9-10 months, and I think it's a very worthy cause, and it's really opened my eyes. So one of the things I want to talk about today was asked to talk about a little bit about the drought, what's been happening with the drought. It's not a secret that we are in a drought. I'll try to throw some numbers at you, some graphics that'll really kind of hopefully set in with you to put it all together. Talk about what we might see this winter. It's not good news. And then talk about what's possible or even likely as we go out through the rest of the century, which honestly is even worse news. Don't go anywhere though. Now what happened? I just turned it off. So how did we get here? So this is a graphic that shows what's been happening for roughly the last 12 months. In the green is where you see precipitation that is above normal. And in the yellow and the brown, that's where you see precipitation that's been below normal. And as you see in the yellows and the orange, from a percentile standpoint, it's actually the bottom 10% over the last 12 months. But one of the things that you do see is that there has been some rain in some parts of California over the last 12 months. And one thing you do see is that the South Coast, that climate zone, which you heard Greg talk about, which actually runs from roughly San Luis Obispo County down south towards San Diego County, was one area within California that was seriously left out over the last 12 months. So it puts even more responsibility on what the group is trying to do. So this plot shows for downtown Los Angeles what the precipitation typically occurs with a strong El Nino. And we had a strong El Nino. We rate they're called ENSO, El Nino Southern Observation or Southern Oscillations. Yes, ENSO is another acronym. NOAA does stand for National Organization for the Advancement of Acronyms. So get used to it. So ENSO, and we rate them on all the way from a La Nina, which is a cold episode, to a El Nino, which is a warm episode, and they go from strong to neutral to weak. Well, last winter was a strong El Nino, and it's a very rare occurrence. These only occur once every 15 years or so. And since 1950, we've only had 6 events, and now 7, counting this last year. So if you plot the precipitation for downtown Los Angeles going all the way back to October, which is the beginning of our water year, and then as you can see these kind of steps as they go up. And those colored lines that are plotted on there are past strong El Ninos. Well, when you see then this solid black line, that's what happened this last winter in downtown Los Angeles. So you can see now where we get this lower 10% on record for precipitation. That yellow triangle there, that points to what we should typically average. So we are in a dry climate. We are practically in a desert. We average less than 15 inches a year downtown Los Angeles. It's Mediterranean climate. Well, not only did we not meet what we typically see with strong El Ninos, but we didn't even meet what we typically meet on a 30-year average. So it's a very unusual occurrence of what just happened this last winter. This is the drought monitor, and this is kind of the Bible of the drought. This is a nationally coordinated product that comes out every week, And it's a product of government agencies, state agencies, county agencies, universities. And where you see the very dark red color, that's considered an exceptional drought. And what happened, at least especially for the West, this is as of August 2nd, we are in, at least from a severe drought up to extreme drought. Most of the West is abnormally dry, but then you see down in Southern California going up into the Southern Sierras, it's an exceptional drought. If you plot this now, if you go back to 2013 in July and just take a one-year snapshot each year, you can kind of see how we ended up where we are today. And it really peaked in the summer of 2015. And for the very first time since they started doing this product in January of 2000, we received the exceptional drought status in California in 2014. Now there was some relief, as we saw in the first graphic. There was some relief in Northern California, but again, this exceptional drought continues along the California South Coast up into the Sierra. So on another way to look at it, if you go all the way back before the year 1900, and if you look at the precipitation that occurred downtown Los Angeles, where you see those bars, those are the calendar year totals. That kind of olive line going across, that's the average. And that red line shows kind of an accumulated deficit or surplus. So as you get drier and drier and drier, that's where you get that red line that keeps dipping lower and lower and lower. Well, one thing it does show is going back to over the last, since 1914, we have had very dry periods that we also have come out of. But one of the things that's actually very striking is when you look at all of those bars, this is the first time we've had 5 consecutive years in downtown Los Angeles of below average precipitation. And it was kind of hard to believe, but you go back there over that long record, there are not, we won't find 5 bars in a row that are below that olive line. On top of the fact that we have not had very much precipitation is the fact that we have been very warm. So when you look at the last 12 months, again, looking at from a percentile standpoint, where you see those orange colors, top 10% warmest on record over the last 12 months. And that continues really going all the way back, and this is now all of California. If we expand the picture, this is the mean temperature going back before 1900, where you see the blue lines, that's where it's below average, where you see the red lines, it's above average. Well, one of the things that sticks out on those numbers on the right, those linear trends, if you look at a trend going back to 1895, almost 2 degrees, keeps going up, and now just over since 1975, we're increasing it at give or take 4 degrees on the trend since 1975. And 2015, January, December was the for California was the second warmest on record. And when you look at just the last 5 years, it is the warmest 5-year period on record for California. So again, trying to wrap it all together, another thing that we look at is called the Palmer Drought Severity Index. In some cases, this works very well, sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, what we're seeing, where you have the green lines, that's where you have a surplus. Where you have the yellow lines, that's where you have a soil moisture deficit. So this starts all the way back to 1900, going through June 2016. And one of the things that really sticks out are these last 5 years. So I'm repeating the same message over and over and over again, but again, it's a very important message. So the outlook for the winter of 2016-17, I told you that wasn't going to be good news. I hope I'm wrong. What's happened with El Nino is we have now cooled in the Central Pacific. That Nino 3.4, that's the one area of the Central Pacific that we can, when measuring the average sea surface temperature anomaly within that box, going all the way back to 1950, that's where we determine whether we're in a La Nina, whether we're in an El Nino. Well, we reached near record temperatures in the Central Pacific this past winter. It was one of the warmest on record. Now it's starting to cool off, and we're cooled off now. And the forecast from the Climate Prediction Center in College Park, a NOAA agency, is for 55 to 60% chance of a weak La Nina this winter. Now, if you naturally associate El Niños with above normal rainfall in Southern California, you should naturally associate La Ninas with below average precipitation in Southern California. And the good news is that in my over 10 years that I've been in Southern California, we've had 1 year in Southern California where we had above normal rainfall. And it's not my fault, I have nothing to do with it. But 1 year, and that was 2010-11, where we actually had a strong La Nina. If you think back, December 17th, 24, 2010, we actually had quite a bit of rainfall, and that actually pushed it up to above normal rainfall. So there is a chance, but the odds are that we will have below average precipitation again for this winter. So this is what you typically see, the jet stream pattern in a La Nina. And whereas in a El Nino, you get the jet stream that dives south into Southern California, brings the storms across the Pacific. And just so you know, we actually had quite a few impacts from El Nino over this past winter. We had high surf. We had the jet stream was just too far north. So if I was Chuck Nolan from Castaway and I was on a deserted island for 4 years and I came back, let's say in June of this year, and I saw what kind of rainfall we got, I would have guessed that we were La Nina. So this is what we see. So this pattern actually looks very similar to what we saw over this past winter, but this is what typically happens. Everything pushes further north. When you put it all together for California, when you look at for weak La Ninas, 70% of the weak La Ninas have been dry in California. And only in a couple of instances, or a few instances, has there been above normal rainfall, and it's mostly confined to central and northern California. But here in Southern California, typically we do end up dry for La Ninas. And for what it's worth, this is the forecast for December, January, February. It looks much like the graphic that I showed a couple of slides ago, dry across the southern tier states, wetter across the northern tier states. So looking beyond this winter, if we can, and there is information that we can use to look beyond this winter, it's very sobering. I'm going to try to put some facts with what you might know about climate change, what you might know about global warming. They are sort of one and the same, but a warming climate does bring changes. So if we look just back through the last 6 months, January through June, and this made quite a bit of news. As a matter of fact, after this announcement came out that January to June of 2016 was the warmest on record globally. I was asked to give an interview for CBS Evening News, and we met them down in Studio City, and I did the interview, and I wasn't able to see the interview on TV that night, so I talked to my wife. I asked, so how did it go? And she goes, it's not good. She goes, the triple D. And she said, she says, death, destruction, and devastation. I said, well, I hope it wasn't that bad. But I tried to convey a sense of urgency. And even if you just look back at the last 6 months, and if you look at that peak up there towards the end, that rise is really quite alarming. Much of what happened since January is as a result of El Nino. We had very warm ocean temperatures in the Central Pacific. But what we saw even back in 1997-98 with the strong El Nino, it wasn't that warm by June. Typically, even when you get the strong El Ninos, they then cool down. And what was very alarming was how we continued to warm even as we got into the summer. So one of the things, our carbon footprint that we're leaving, and this is quite alarming. This is a NOAA observatory in Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And this plot shows the concentration of CO2 in parts per million going all the way back before 1960. And you see this climb up here. For the very first time, they measured over 400 parts per million CO2 at the Mauna Loa Observatory. And there's a comment there from the lead scientist for NOAA's Global Greenhouse Gas Reference Network, is that they are increasing faster than in hundreds of thousands of years. And you go back and look at paleoclimate records, we haven't been this high in over 800,000 years as far as carbon dioxide. And it's explosive, and that's probably the best way to describe it. So I invite you, if you haven't seen this before, if you're not familiar with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I invite you to take a look at it. I don't have the link on here. You can just Google it, and you'll get lots of information on it. But this whole effort started in 1990. There have been multiple assessment reports that came out from the initial report in 1990. Hundreds of countries, hundreds of scientists and lead authors that go into these reports. They issued a fifth assessment report back in 2013. And if you want to just get a good summary of what those, there's 3 working groups, what all those 3 working groups looked at, you can go look at the synthesis report. But here are some of the main points from this fifth assessment of the IPCC report. The warming of the climate system is unequivocal. There was a time, maybe 20 years ago, that there was some uncertainty, but as time goes on, the certainty gets greater. Human influence on the climate system is also clear. And the evidence, what's even more disturbing is the evidence has grown since the 4th assessment, which took place back in, I believe, 2003. And it's been an interesting progression. And even as the meteorologist in charge, back when climate change, even 11 years ago, to see how we progressed over the last 11 years, it was a very touchy subject. We had any question we got from media, we had to pass to our public affairs. Over time, though, we have been given more leeway to speak about what's going on and different phases of what we've been able to talk about. Both of these are a result of those first 2 phases. CO2 greenhouse gas emissions are now higher than ever, as I showed on that NOAA plot. Now, there's other things in terms of the certainty and uncertainty of heat waves, extreme weather, extreme precipitation events, tropical storms. One of the things that is actually fairly certain, and in the terms being used very, very likely, are the occurrences of heat waves and occurring more often and lasting longer. Now, we have to be careful we don't develop like a postage stamp view of heat waves. Just because it's going to be warm this weekend doesn't mean that, oh, here it is. It's over a much longer scale. But this is one of the things out of a lot of the results of these assessment groups that is very common. So, and one of the things that I said on the CBS TV News interview, even if we stopped carbon output, froze it right now, with no additional carbon output, CO2 output, we would still experience changes to the climate system for centuries. It's almost as though you put your hand in a sidewalk for the footprint, and that cement dries. It's there. It's not going to go away. So I'm going to finish up here with one more slide. And what they do is they run these climate models with different levels of CO2 output. And the blue one is at 475 parts per million, which we're practically there right now. If you continue to increase that carbon output all the way up to 1313 parts per million, and you look at what the temperature anomaly relative to 1861 to 1880 is, if you see what happens by the year 2100 in these different lines. So here is if we just freeze it at practically where we're at 475, we're still going to continue to be warmer. So it stops. But if you continue to add more, now it goes even further up to where at over 1,300 parts per million now you're looking at, and this is degrees Celsius. Now you may think, well, it's not a big deal, but these are projected model global anomalies. And so again, this is a very alarming graph right here. And I think that when you talk about climate change, and some of these reports within the AR5 also go into mitigation, how we can address this. And of course, reforestation and afforestation are also 2 very important aspects of what we can help to do to address some of this issue. That's all I have right now. I think, do we have some time for questions?
Yes, we have some time for questions, and that's also going to give us a chance to put on John's new presentation. So we'll just take a couple questions. We're also going to ask Mark to stay through the panel discussion so that if it comes up and we can work it in, that would be good too. So we have our first question.
Does it concern you that in this political season there's been no discussion about climate change and its effects?
I'll tell you, it is encouraging to, I'll give you a political answer by not answering that directly. But it is encouraging to see globally the efforts that are being made internationally to help address this issue. There was just, it's called COP21 in Paris that took place last November and December, where a goal of that conference, it was a conference that took place, hundreds of countries, part of the United Nations group, to really address really the CO2 problem and climate change. And it's going to take really a monumental effort in terms of, in our present political climate. It is something that people need to know of. And we are increasing the public's awareness of climate change. If you look at the surveys that are being done across the country, that percentage of people that believe that the climate has changed and then the climate is warming, it has been going up. So you have the doubters, you have the believers, you have those that are in the middle. I won't take a show of hands here, put you on the spot. But the good news is that the people that believe it and understand it, the number of people is going up. And that is in part due to the awareness that's being brought about, such as with the media and education. Yes?
Hi, Mark. My name is Ann Fankner. I live up in Sacramento. I'm with the Davie Resource Group, and I also serve as the chair of the Sacramento Valley chapter of the California Urban Forest Council. And that was a very sobering presentation. And I don't really have a question for you, but I would like to put an invitation out to everyone here that we have a Learn at Lunch series for the Sacramento chapter. And this upcoming Thursday, the 18th, Professor Joe McBride will be taking the information that you shared and extending it and talking about resiliency. And specifically, he's encouraging us to add temperature modeling to our attributes in terms of selecting trees for the future. So this free event will take place at the Sacramento Tree Foundation, August 18th. It's a Learn at Lunch. You bring your own lunch. 11:30 to 1 p.m., and you can find the information on the California Urban Forest Council website. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Liz Skarzat. I'm with City Plants. We plant trees here in Los Angeles. And I don't know if you remember, but a couple years ago, Fox News was in New York, and they had a really terrible winter, and they stopped people on the sidewalk and asked them if they believed in global warming, and if they said yes, then they showed them the snow. If they had been stupid enough to stop you, what would you have said?
Yeah, that is a common misperception of climate change and global warming. Okay, yeah, two winters ago, asked people in the Northeast if they believed in it, and they would say absolutely not. You know, Boston's pile of snow took until summer to melt away in the city. But that's not how, that's why I say it's important, and it's interesting in the political realm, there's people that on the Hill, they may call it global warming. The more accurate term is climate change. And global warming doesn't mean it warms everywhere. It means that you have changes in the climate system. And we will continue to have cold winters in the Northeast and the North. And so that's why I said earlier, you have to be careful you don't take a postage stamp view of what's happening. You know, storms make weather, weather makes climate, and it's over a long period of time. So the challenge is trying to get people to understand and educate people that, yes, the climate is changing despite the fact that you have 10 feet of snow in your front yard. I can relate to that, so.